I think Netanyahu's going to stay in power. I don't think his opponents are very strong. But that's what my opinion. I haven't voted for anyone. I can't vote even if I wouldn't. But my friend asked me, if you were in Israel, who would you vote to? I said, I'll take an airplane and leave Israel. That's what I would do. So here, I just sent a link to the class in case somebody wants to watch from home. Okay. Yeah, the I sometimes I forget to plug in the microphone. You have to remind me. Because I think the microphone volume on this YouTube channel, I don't know, something is not right. Anyway, what's the plug in? Ema's trying to watch my class from upstairs. She's so sweet. You should tell her to listen about how people adore her cupcakes. You can ask her. She's online. More cupcakes.
Ima, more cupcakes, please.
They have 2 donations.
More cupcakes.
Jason eats all of them.
Yeah.
Mother's the best cook in the world.
You know what? I think she is.
Okay. Anyways, so we'll try to focus today a little bit about Passover. It's going to be a little different of a class, shorter, not longer.
So why is it you're sitting down and you're eating, you're enjoying your life? You're supposed to welcome the...
Now welcome the poor people to our table. Yeah, that's a good...
You know, by the way, I
turn on the air conditioner.
I'm better off just putting a sign there saying no beggars allowed, or...
No beggars allowed. Yeah.
So I was in Berkeley, I think last year, the year before, for Passover.
Okay.
And the rabbi said the 4 children instead of the 4 sons.
Rabbi said is what?
It was identified normally as the 4 sons.
Right.
It said the 4 children.
The 4 children.
Right.
Oh,
Nima.
supposed to be,
More
what's it called, egalitarian?
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, a rabbi, a Chabad rabbi? No.
Not a Shabbat. Let's say rabbi, one of the other.
Okay.
But anyhow.
More people coming.
People here. Quick, get
Quick, go, the cupcakes come.
Cupcakes.
Seriously, you want more cupcakes? We'll get more cupcakes. There's upstairs a whole box of those. It's not good for your diet though, I gotta tell you.
It's working.
It is working. We're online. Instead of studying Torah, all we do is talk about the cupcakes. Okay, so there's a story about Pinchas Sapir. Today there's elections in Israel. So the story about Pinchas Sapir was the Ministry of Treasure or Secretary of Treasure in Israel many years ago. And then you know how it is before elections, these ministers, they go all over the place and they pretend like they care about the people. So they get into an institution, an academic institution, a university. And everybody's like, we're going to need more new benches, and we need a new classroom, and we need a budget for this and a budget for that. And he has his aide. Hey, Josh. So he has his aide. What? No cupcakes? You stay. We'll get more. So he has his aide. We're talking about the Secretary of Treasury prior to elections. Today's elections in Israel goes to the academic institutions, universities, colleges, and everybody's telling their demands. And his aide is writing down. We need this school needs a new classroom, this needs a new auditorium. Write it down. He says his aide. They walk out of the room, they walk out of the gates, and he says, what are we going to do with the note? He says, just toss it in the trash bin. What are we going to do with it? There's nothing, right? So they continue their tour and they get to the prison. And again, they walk in, everybody, the Ministry of Treasure, please, can you help us? We need new wards, we need this, we need to. So he says to his aide, right, he's taking notes. They walk out of prison. Oh, you heard that?
Don't put it too close to freak out.
So they walk out to prison, and the guy's got 20 pages filled with notes, and he says to the Secretary of Treasury, should I dispose of the note? He said, no, you should dispose. Okay, take it to office. We'll take care of it. He says, what do you mean? Why should we take care of it? The other time, he says, listen to me. We are not going to end up in university anytime soon, but we might end up in prison. So take care of their requirements. We might end up here, so we might as well take care of that. We're not going to go into we're not enrolled in any college. Hey, okay. So, we always try to start with a little joke. Well, it's not a joke today. It is election day in Israel. So, whatever you can have us say, Marty Wolf is here. We have to stop our class to greet A VIP. How's it going?
Not bad, thanks.
Go.
You're a real
Just sit.
VIP?
I'm sorry?
Good.
Marty, you can have a sit here next to me.
Ah. That's funny, I like that. We might have here.
Yeah, we might end up here. That's the end of it. We want to talk a bit about the Exodus, about the Haggadah. It's an interesting story. Every year we tell it anew. I called up this Israeli guy who said he doesn't want to come to Seder. And I said, why don't you come? And he said, I know, it takes 2 hours to go through the thing. I said, listen, it doesn't take 2 hours by us. I don't have 2 hours to spend on it. We do it, it's concentrated, we have it done, and we move on. No, I know the story. But people ask that question all the time. We know the story. What's the use? I mean, it's nice, the celebration, the family-wise, but what's the use of telling the story? Today we'll try to analyze a bit, some details of the story. Oh, there's more. Look at this.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, after we're done, can we still have, usually a lot of people, they go to 1 o'clock in the morning. Can we come over here and talk a little bit?
By all means. You're very welcome to do
We're
so.
having the party over here, right?
The party over here the next night, the second night.
Where's Friday night? Where are we going Friday?
Friday night is at the Shangri-La Hotel.
So hang on, after
Saturday
we're
night
we
here.
can study a little bit? Or
Yeah,
talk a
so
little bit?
listen, if you could survive the 7-course meal after the Shangri-La and you still have what to talk about, by all means. Yeah. So it's a very serious meal. Anyway, so in this class we'll try to examine the details and look deeper in the meaning of this great holiday. And let's start with some quotes from the Haggadah. Okay, so we open up the Haggadah and we have the part called Magid. There's 10 sections in the Haggadah, right? We go in, we open up, we make the Kiddush, and then we start telling the story. Once we start telling the story, this is the first quote of the story. We point towards the matzah, and we say the following. This is the bread of affliction that our father ate in the land of Egypt. Notice this quote, in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is in need, let him come and conduct the Seder of Passover. This year we are here, next year in the land of Israel. This year we are slaves. Next year we will be free people. That's how the statement, that's how it starts the Seder. And of course the famous question, we just asked that question in the text message. You're now inviting the people after the doors are shut. Everybody's invited. Everybody's got their seat number and they paid for it. Now you're inviting whoever needs. You want to invite, send out an email, send out a message 2 days before, 3 days. Notice in synagogue, tell everyone who wants to eat, you should come to me. But instead, everyone is seated by the table. And now you remember to invite people over to your table. That doesn't really make sense. The second question, you see here, it says, the bread of affliction our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. We're going to try and notice whether they ate it in Egypt or they ate it out of Egypt. When they left, we need to see what's the source of everything. Right away we see.
Wait. Go back.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so that's Shmona matzah, right?
Correct.
Do we believe that's exactly the same what the matzah looked like 2,000 years ago?
Believe yes, no, not sure.
But we believe.
We believe. No, I'm very honest with you. This is, we always, some things we have a tradition for, and, we had people coming from all over the world, Jewish people coming from Yemen, Jewish people coming from Hungary, Jewish people coming from Russia and from other countries, and they all had slightly different version of matzah.
Yeah.
So do we know for sure this is the exact way? The Yemenite, my family, is Yemenite, they have their matzah is soft and nice to eat. Yeah, they make soft matzah.
Yeah, this is what the teacher told us in Alma. And about 200 years ago, they started to make these matzahs. But before, they would eat the different kind. So when Israel went out of Egypt, so they eat that matzah.
You're right. We don't know. So your teacher told you 200.
That was beautiful.
That's
So
my
anyway.
son, if you don't mind.
So this is to the best of our knowledge. The
Correct.
Savior said,
Exactly.
here's a recipe, Shmarty Pants. Make it this way.
This is the way, right? This is the way we do it now.
The recipe, yeah.
Could it be done differently? Probably. Now let me just make a comment. The machine-made matzah, surely not the way things were done. Machine-made, just the word machine-made matzah didn't really exist in those days. So I personally don't use machine-made matzah. We only have shmura matzah. I mean, we have shmura, we have the machine-made. We obviously provide it to whoever needs it, but we don't use it. We use just the handmade original form. Again, original as much as we could say it is. So this is what it says here. They ate in the land of Egypt. But look at the quote. Second quote, also from the same section. This matzah that we eat, for what reason? Because the dough of our fathers did not have time to become leaven before the King of the Kings, King of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. Thus it is said they baked matzah cake for dough. You see matzah cakes, Richard. It's not that bad as it is. From the dough they had brought out of Egypt, because it was not leaven, for they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay it, and they had also prepared any other provisions. So, which means, when did they eat the matzah? When they left Egypt, as they were living. They didn't eat it in Egypt. So it's not clear to us where exactly was the matzah eaten.
Wait a second, hold on.
Yeah.
They didn't have breakfast yet. They had to be part of it in
So, some people say, another opinion, I didn't bring it here, but another opinion had that they actually had matzah throughout their time in Egypt. You see, matzah is a very easy, they didn't have fast food those days. And keep in mind, the Jews were enslaved. And the Egyptians, all they care about was how much more could they produce from the Jews, how much more could they have, derived from the Jewish people's work. So they gave them those fast food, a food that doesn't take long to prepare. In less than 3-4 minutes you have matzah. And it's also easier to eat or whatever, It's not a whole meal you can indulge, it's just a piece of cracker, to be very honest. So some people say that they ate it through their time in Egypt. Maharal says it's not true. It's not true. What? While they were in Egypt. So that means it's not necessarily has to do with the Exodus. It actually represents the food they had throughout their years of enslavement. But Maharal rejects that and brings all kinds of evidence why it's not the case.
It's very possible also that they could, there's no sign that says now leaving Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they left their area, Goshen,
Uh-huh.
and kept going, okay, now we're eating this.
And now just eat as on the go.
And also
I agree.
Egypt is a state of mind too.
Yeah. You got it worked out, Richard. You got it.
State of mind.
Somebody's been doing his homework. Okay. Well, Jay was, messing with the Arabs.
No, it's a state of mind, Egypt. I mean, I'm out of Egypt. I don't know about you, sir, but I'm out of Egypt.
Okay. Anyway, so we see what's the story with the matzah. Here, still in Egypt. Look, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God took us out from there with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm. If the Holy One, blessed be, had not taken our fathers out of Egypt, then we, our children, and our children's children would have remained enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Even if all of us were wise, all of us understanding, all of us knowing the Torah, we would still be obligated to discuss the Exodus from Egypt. And everyone who discusses the Exodus from Egypt at length is praiseworthy. That's how we begin the Haggadah. We need to tell the story. Facts are, if God would not intervene and get us out of this place, we would actually be still there. Here's a question. You know that Abraham was given this whole story 400 years prior to that. We're going to read, I brought this whole quote. Abraham made a covenant with God. Abraham was the first Jewish person, the first Hebrew, Israelite, whatever you want to call it. Abraham was the first person to discover God. God had revealed Himself to him. Until Abraham, everyone were pagans. They were the idol worship. And Abraham started thinking, and it says they're bowing down to the sun, but the sun disappears 12 days, 12 hours a day. And then the moon is not here. And people used to worship stone and wood and all kinds of different idols. And Abraham couldn't take it. He said, there must be something, an entity that's much higher than that. It cannot be a man-made God. There must be something that made us, that created us. And out of his knowledge, he started researching and understanding. And then God revealed Himself to him and said, yes, indeed, there is such a thing as God. And Abraham was the first one to come out with that message. So that same Abraham, God revealed Himself to him and made a covenant with him. And He told him, you should know that 400 years, your children's children will be enslaved in Egypt. And then they would leave Egypt. And when they leave, they would leave with great possession. They would take everything with them. So this promise was given, this is a prophecy that was given to Abraham. It's quoted in the book of Genesis. I'll soon show you the quote. So the question is asked. The question is asked. God is telling us, you know what? If I wouldn't take you, you'll be still stuck there. Hold it. You promised Abraham. God doesn't. He's not a politician. He doesn't promise things and then doesn't deliver. He told Abraham, we're going to be, just like He told Abraham, we're going to be in Egypt. And soon we'll see that He actually gave him a choice between different things. and we'll try to explain why. So he told them, they're going into Egypt, they'll go out of Egypt. So what's the big miracle? You promised it's going to happen, right? Let's look at a promise made to Abraham. And he said to Abraham, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years, and the fourth generation will return here. This was said to Abraham in the land of Canaan, in the land of Israel. And Hashem told them, God told them, the fourth generation will return here. So this was a promise that was made. What's the big deal? Why do we make the Exodus such a big deal? It was just a promise that was delivered. Let's look a little bit about the beginning of everything. This is what the Haggadah continues and says. In the beginning, some people say about traditional people like myself, you say, you guys, you belong to the past. This reminds me of my grandfather, my grandfather. It's time to move on. You guys are the older generation. Those days, everybody was like you. But now we're advanced. This is 2019. Come out of it. So you open up the Haggadah, you say, you want to see what was in the beginning? In the beginning, the old generation you want to relate to, they were all pagans. We're actually from the newer generation. We're the Reform, so to speak. This is post-Reform. This is the older generation. Look what the Haggadah tells us about the history of our nation. Not always history in Jewish context is good. Many religions, they like to tell all the good things about their patriarchs, about their forefathers. Everybody were good. They did miracles, wonders. They didn't do any mistakes, any errors, any mess-ups. You open up our history, it's full of stories that are not necessarily positive. We tell the truth. Listen, no one was perfect. No one's perfect now. No one was perfect 2,000 years ago and 4,000 years ago as well. That gives us a bit of a hope. When we relate to people, we say, okay, this is impossible to relate to. But when we read about our forefathers and also some mistakes they had done in the context that it was done, we could say, oh, this is something I can relate to. We're humans. We could take the wrong choice sometimes. Anyway, in the beginning, our fathers served idols. But now God, whatever. I forget, I always forget this word, omnipresent. One had brought us close to his service, as it is said. Joshua said to all people, thus said the Lord God of Israel, your fathers used to live on the other side of the river. Terach, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. And I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and I led him throughout the whole land of Canaan. I increased his seed and gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob, and Esau to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it, and to Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. So the story is that Abraham was revealed, was visioned. God had visioned himself to Abraham, and he gave him two sons, right? Isaac, you know the story, right? Isaac, you got that right. Ishmael and Isaac, Yitzchak, and he told him, Ki Yitzchak yireh lecha zara. Isaac will be your son. This will be your continuity. Isaac had two sons as well, and they all separated, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob went, and then Ishmael and Esau, they went sideways, they deviated. And of course, from Ishmael, we have all your pals in Saudi Arabia. That's the descendants of Ishmael. And the descendants of Esau are the European people, Edom, Esavu Edom. That's pretty much so. As you said, what did you say? They're bigger than us in a few inches, right? So a little more than a few inches, right? But that's how it is. Anyway, trying to backtrack a bit on our history, we see that it all started in a very weird way. Everyone were idol worshippers, and then Abraham started, as I said, discovering and realizing, and then Isaac, he passed it along to Isaac, which passed it along to Jacob, which had 12 children, and obviously these are Jacob's name was Israel, and the sons of Israel, hence us, are the ones to continue that tradition. And look at what here. This is what, everybody knows this part of the Haggadah. We always sing it, Vehi she'amda, Vehi she'amda. And this is a quote in English. This God guarantee is what it stood by our fathers and for us. For not just one alone had risen against us to destroy us, but in every generation they rise against us to destroy us. And the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us from their hand. A very famous quote, very interesting quote. Just reviewing the past century, we're talking about Hitler, Stalin, everything in between. We go a little further into history. We get to the Crusades, the Inquisition. Just every generation, literally every generation, between the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Median Empire, the Assyrian, Greek Empire, they're all after us. It's not something, it's not we thinking that they're picking on us. It is like that. They went after us and they always wanted to get rid of us. And guess what? They couldn't. They made severe damages. They made travesties to our nation, but they couldn't get rid of us. Where are the Babylonians today? Where are the Romans today? You know, in the little Colosseum in Rome. There's the Romans and the Babylonians, the Greek, the Assyrians. Where are they? They're in the history books. Where are the Jewish people? Right here and right now. They couldn't. But this quote, as much as it's brought and elaborated, is quite intriguing because it's all about us. They wanted to destroy us. They risen against us. And Hashem blesses us and saves us from their hand. What's this whole story about us and now? You know, we're saying that God had made a promise to Abraham that he will have children and that his children will have children and that basically they would continue on the same tradition. So this whole thing, you know, of course everybody looks at God and say thank God for what we have, but this whole us, there's something more to it. There's something that's more relevant and we want to try and get to it. And here's a very interesting question which should be asked. Should it be obvious that God is on our side? After all, those who are against us are wicked and we are the righteous. Now, you know, if you say that God is going to help you although you're wrong, that's something that should be praiseworthy over. But if you're saying there's a vicious, cruel nation that all they want is to kill, to annihilate, and to destroy our people. And there's on the other side us, which we didn't do much. You know, it was always, the reasons always changed, but it was the same. It's because we're too poor or because we're too rich, because we're too smart, because we're too dumb, because there's too many of us, because there's too little of us, because we control the world's economy, because we're good in politics, because we're not, you know, because we're, you know, the reasons always change, but the same concept always exists. So of course God will protect us. Why wouldn't he protect us? They're wicked, we're righteous. And the third question, why on Passover more than all other holidays? We just came from Purim, and I'll soon show you a quote that takes us to Purim had actually the same exact concept. Why on Passover? It's all about that. God protects us and helps us and saves us. And you know, he did us throughout the generations. What's so special about this holiday that we commemorate it so far and we make it into a big deal? Let's move on a little bit in the Exodus story. And he says like this, go forth and learn what Laban the Aramean wanted to do to our father Jacob. Pharaoh had issued a decree against the male children only, but Laban wanted to uproot everyone. As it is said, Arami Oved David, the Aramean wished to destroy my father, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned them, few in number, and he became there a nation great and mighty and numerous. You know, Pharaoh, people think Hitler, people think Stalin, people think Mao Zedong. Sorry, Chinese government. Mao Zedong, they don't listen to us, I hope. So people think, you know, dictators. Pharaoh, he was way worse. Pharaoh used to bathe, listen to this, bathe in Jewish babies' blood. Okay, this is bathe. People look at the jacuzzi as some sort of a nice, you know, time. He used to bathe in Jewish children's blood. The people used to build bricks and walls. Where they were missing a brick, used to take a baby and shove it there. Okay, just have a little bit of understanding cruelty. You know, the amount of people that died in Egypt throughout the years of enslavement is far greater than all the other persecutions all combined. You know, we came out of there very little than what we had. Remember, they had 6 babies each at a time. This was the normal. The normal delivery would have 6 kids. So anyways, we're talking about Laban. Laban was the father-in-law of Jacob. You know, Laban, he wasn't a great guy altogether. Lavan Arami, and in Hebrew we call it Arami Ramai. He was a thief. He was a crook. He was you're getting an image of who he was. What? No, of course not. Of course not. How could he be Jewish? Yeah, well, you know, it was before Rachel and Leah. They were not Jewish. Look at that. That is right. They were not Jewish people or non-Jewish. It was all one big family. Anyway, he was related. He was the brother. Laban was the brother of Rebekah. He was the uncle of Jacob, right? Jacob married his cousin.
When you said about leaving Egypt, they would take all the possessions with them. But what were the possessions you're talking about? The things that the Egyptians had?
Yeah, they had before leaving Egypt, they went to borrow. They went to borrow from the Egyptians their jewelry and their stuff, right? Yeah, and they borrowed and they forgot to return. No, it wasn't forget. No, it was God's commandment that they had to leave Egypt with great possessions. So during the 3 days of darkness, you know, the second to last plague was the plague of darkness. And the darkness, this was the only time in history when it wasn't just a blackout, it was the darkness actually made people freeze in their spot. So they did, if somebody was just in the middle of scratching their head, when darkness came, they actually remained like that for 3 days. They were completely frozen. It was dark, but they also stopped. The only ones who were not affected by the plagues altogether were the Jews. So during the time when the Egyptians were like this, so the Jews went in and they went on a tour. You know, a tour? You know, they went in, they opened the drawers, nobody's disturbing. You open the drawer, checks one in the cabinet, what's the story, you know, checking a little bit of the checkbooks, and they know everything now. They didn't take anything, they knew everything. Then they came to the Egyptians and he said, you know, could you lend me some, I got some tea party, I want some of your golden cutlery. Why would I have golden cutlery? Oh, it's on the third drawer on the right. How would I know? Just go look there, I think it's there. Anyways, that's how they borrowed from them. By the way, just to close that story, years later, Alexander the Great summoned the wise people, the sages of the Jews, and he said, you know, Alexander the Great, he was in Alexandria in Egypt, and he said, you guys left Egypt, you took all that jewelry with you, where is it? We want it back. So they sent this guy, somebody said, you know, the rabbis came back, they said, what are we going to do? They tear their heads, you know, their hairs. What are we going to answer? You know, they took all that jewelry, it's written in the Torah. So there was a guy who said, I'm going to go confront the king. What are you going to go? And he said, listen, I'm not that big of a guy, and I'm not very famous. His name was Gavia ben Psisa. And he told them, I'll go. If I win, I win. If I fail, then he said, who's this guy? We didn't send him. This guy's crazy. Well, he just went on his own. So they said, okay, we don't have any, you know, like, what's the best worst plan? What is it called? The worst idea, the best worst idea. So he went there. You know, they didn't have calculators back then. They had those, what's it called? When abacus. That's in Chinese.
Yeah, abacus.
Okay, right? That's what we studied math. We had the beginning of it. It was long. So he went in, and you know, Alexander the Great. When you imagine Alexander the Great, he was a great king that you don't speak to him like we speak, like I speak to Richard, right? So Alexander said, you know, it's written in the Torah. You guys, you took out of Egypt. And he said, okay, what else is written in the Torah? Your Royal Highness. What else? What else? It's written that we were slaves for 210 years. He said, what is the minimum wage in your kingdom? How many people were in Egypt back then? So he got to they got this thing, and they had 600,000 people working on a minimum wage for 210 years. He said, Your Highness, you actually owe us more than what we took, because that wasn't enough just to compensate the time of the work that was done there. Just to close that story. Anyway, obviously, so it all started, Laban the Aramate, he wanted to destroy us, he wanted to kill us. And, you know, the story is always like that. There's always the bad people, and there's the Jewish people, and it's like that. This kind of thread goes through history. Anyway, God's protecting us, and this is also in the time of Jacob. And let's look at what we just celebrated, Purim. This is a quote from Megillah. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow before him, Haman was filled with wrath. But he thought, what is it?
Contemptible.
What is contemptible? Oh, okay. To kill only Mordechai. For they had informed him of Mordechai's nationality. Haman sought to annihilate all Jews, Mordechai's people, throughout Ahasuerus' entire kingdom. Haman understands Mordechai is not going to bow down to him. Not because Mordechai doesn't like him, because Mordechai is Jewish. There's something more to it. So why would I get rid of Mordechai? I need to get rid of all the Jews. Now, obviously that didn't happen. Why don't we praise God for that? Why don't we make the whole Seder based in Purim? Again, a very obvious example that God stood on our side and we managed to beat our enemies and we were not destroyed. So what's the story with Pesach? Let's look further into the Haggadah. Okay, there's the song Dayenu. Everybody knows the song. Dayenu, Dayenu. So here it goes. I quoted some of the parts. It's a long song. But if he had brought us from Egypt but had not carried us to judgment against them, that would be sufficient. If he had destroyed his idols and not submitted their firstborn, that would be sufficient. Submitted their firstborn, giving us wealth. And of course the last one, if he would have brought us to the promised land of Israel and not built for us the Beit HaBchira. Initially left it in Hebrew. Beit HaBchira is the translation of the Holy Temple. And the last line of Dayenu says that if God were to make all these miracles, he would bring us to Israel after everything that happened, and he would not build for us the Holy Temple, that would be sufficient. And then, what does it say? That he built for us the Holy Temple to atone our sins. Remember that. Built us the Holy Temple to atone our sins. And that's a big thing. The last line is Beit HaBchira. Now the first translation, the regular translation is Holy Temple. But it's not the common used word. In Hebrew we say Beit HaMikdash. You know, Beit HaMikdash, that's the word for holy temple. Instead it says Beit HaBchira, which literally translates as the chosen house. Now, that's quite an uncommon name for Beit HaMikdash, for the holy temple. And there's something to it, the chosen house. We're going to get a little bit about that choice. Our choice, God's choice, and everything that's in between them. Okay, so why is it that's how it ends? We had plenty of questions. I'm getting to the answers. Okay, we got plenty of questions. I'm sorry, Jay, it's taking a little longer than I expected.
Well, it's a little bit upsetting.
I know. Okay, so chosen house. We had all these things. Why Passover just now? Why do we invite people when everybody's already on the table? And why do we make such a big deal out of the Exodus when God had promised this to Abraham? It's merely God delivering what He had promised. Now let's look at things. Let's put things in context a bit. So Passover is about questions. You know, we ask our kids to ask questions. We make all kinds of things to have them intrigued, right? We do all kinds of things we don't normally do with that dinner. And as they ask the questions, right, Manishtana, they ask the questions, and we start by relating the story. We articulate the story to them in a way that they would also understand. They have questions, we should have the answers, right? Now, this doesn't necessarily relate to kids and adults. You know, as we say many times, it's not Jewish years are not the thing that is written, the date of birth on your passport. Someone can be very old and yet very young in knowledge. Someone can be young and the other way around. So we're talking about helping each other to understand the story, because it's all about that togetherness. This holiday, the part of that we celebrate is trying to relate the story and see what it really means to us. So the child rises and asks the questions and hopefully is looking for answers. He knows it's Passover night and he knows we're celebrating the Exodus. And we just made Kiddush. We just said Kiddush. We make the Kiddush with the wine and we say Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, in memory to the Exodus. And we're all here, we're celebrating. It's a beautiful hall. It's a festivity. And as we start celebrating, the child says, what is there to celebrate about? And he's asking, it doesn't seem like we're redeemed. You don't have to read too many newspapers to understand that the world is a chaos and crazy things are going out there to Jews and to non-Jews. And moreover, let's look at the Haggadah instead of here. The Lord took us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with a great manifestation and with signs and wonders. The Lord took us out of Egypt not through an angel, not through a seraph, not through a messenger. The Holy One, blessed be He, did it in His glory by Himself. Thus it is said, in that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and I will smite every firstborn. Smite or smite? Sorry, I remember my friend Smith from somewhere. Smite every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, and I will carry out judgment against all gods of Egypt, the Lord. I, the Lord. You see, they had many gods. I will pass through the land of Egypt. I am not an angel, right? I'll smite, and not a anyway, I am the Lord and none other. And the child is asking, where is the poverty from? And also the nation they will serve, I will judge, and afterwards they will go forth with great possession. The child, he doesn't know much, but he knows that not everybody is wealthy. And he knows there's a lot of poverty in the world. And he knows that even in the Seder table, there are people who are less fortunate than others. It's a big Seder table. And he said, God had promised us, we leave Egypt with money, with gold, with possessions. Where is that? What's going on? Why is the world crazy? We're talking about redemption. I don't see any redemption here. Yeah, there's what to celebrate. It's nice. But what about us? Me, you, here, now. What's going on? So the child says, God had taken us out of Egypt. Okay, well, God can do everything He wants, right? Nothing could stop God. So what stopped God from freeing us completely? We came out of Egypt, and guess what? Troubles came. And the Egyptians are after us, splitting of the Red Sea. We get into the desert. We start fighting this way, that way, 40 years in the desert. We get into Israel until we build a temple. You know how many years? More than 400 years they were in Israel. Fighting. We'll build it here. We'll build it there. No, they didn't fight that. But they had what to fight about. And guess what? First temple destroyed. 70 years later, another temple. 420 years, destroyed. Exile, another exile. Persecutions, crusade. Stalin, Hitler. What's going on? He said, God had freed us from Egypt, right? He meant that we'll be a free nation. Why aren't we free? What's going on? The child asked a question. It's a very sincere question. He says, you're telling me the story about Egypt. I want to know, what about me and you? What about now and here? So this is, he says, where's the poverty? Here, and this is what the quote from Genesis, the covenant with Abraham. I didn't want to cut it. Okay, but I'll try to read it. And he said, "Oh Lord God, how will I know I'll inherit it?" Speaking of Israel. And he said to him, "Take for me 3 heifers and 3 goats and 3 rams and a turtle dove." It wasn't a turtle, it was a dove. I don't know what a turtle does here. And a young bird. And he took him all these and he divided them in the middle and he placed each part in the opposite of its mate. And he did it to divide the birds. But he did not divide the birds. The birds of prey descended upon carcasses and Abraham drove them away. You say when we do a covenant in those times, a covenant is done that the two people, a covenant is a contract. And the custom they had was the two people would pass through a certain corridor made out of, this is all symbolic. The Zohar, by the way, elaborates every detail of this covenant. Why is it made in such a way? Why 3 and 3 and 3? Why the bird? Why this? Why that? Anyway, we won't go into it. And the sun was about to set, and a deep sleep fell off Abraham, and behold, a great darkness was falling upon him. Great darkness is a sign for exile. Okay? And he said to Abraham, "You shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. And also the nation they will serve I will judge, and afterwards they will go forth with great possessions. But you will come to your forefathers in peace. You will be buried in a good old age, and the 4th generation will return here, for the iniquity of Amorites will not be complete until then. Now it came to pass the sun had set, and it was dark, and behold, a smoking furnace and a firebrand, which passed between these parts. On that day the Lord formed a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed I have given this land from the river of Egypt until the great river of Euphrates." So God made that covenant with Abraham, and he told them, this is what is going to happen. Now look at what the Midrash says. God asks him a question. He says, your offsprings are going to get punished, so to speak. And he asked Abraham, which hardships do you request for your children? I didn't mean the word punishment. Hardship. Which hardship you want? Do you want Gehinnom? What's Gehinnom? Purgatory. Or exile. And Abraham chose exile over purgatory. And the question is, why? You have a nice grandfather who discovered God, who did everything in his might for God, and God says, listen here, your descendants are going to get beaten up. What would you choose? Would you choose purgatory? Why would he say that? Why would God tell that to Abraham? Why would God want all these hardships? Why would Abraham be giving choice for something that is going to happen 400 years from today? Oh, I want my descendants to go through this, to go through that. We must say there's a reason that God wanted us. And we must say there's also a mission that we had to complete. And like we said earlier, sometimes we make it, sometimes we don't. And we didn't make it at that time. So we had implications. Anyway, this is what God tells Egypt. This is what God tells Abraham. In order for you to choose between the different things that we'll go through. So this, told you this is going to be a short class today. Okay. Why this? So we said, why the Abraham children have to go through hardship or suffering? Let's read on and see. Okay, in the Midrash Rabbah, it is written. That's what the Rebbe explains. In the beginning, the essence of Shekhinah, God's presence. You asked me about the time I went to the Rebbe's resting place. This is Yud Shvat. This is the quote from the Maimer, from the discourse we studied on that night. In the beginning, the essence of Shekhinah, God's presence, was apparent in this lowly world. However, in the wake of the cosmic sin of the tree of knowledge, that's the first sin that happened in the world, the tree of knowledge, the Shekhinah departed from earth and rose into heavens. Later, on account of the sin of Cain and then of Enosh, Cain, of course, killed his brother, and Enosh started idol worshipping. The Shekhinah withdrew even further from this world, rising from the nearest heaven to the second and then to the third. Later, you had the sins of the generations of, what is it? Deluge? What is that? I don't know that word. Anyway. The flood. Couldn't they write flood? Anyway. Caused it to recede from the third heaven to the fourth, and so on. The Midrash proceeds to explain that after the sins of 7 generations, it caused the divine presence to withdraw 7 spiritual levels, right? The 7 firmaments. We know them from Kabbalah. From its initial manifestation in this world. And then, guess what? We're starting it again to the other side now. 7 tzaddikim, 7 righteous people arose whose divine service drew the divine presence down once more into this world below. Through the merit of Abraham, the Shekhinah was brought down from the 7th to the 6th. Yitzchak, Isaac brought it from the 6th to the 5th. His son, and so on and so on, until Moses was the last one, the 7th one. He was the one to draw down God into this world. And guess what? It happened. God came down on Mount Sinai to present us the Torah. The Lord came down to this world, spoke to us, gave us the 10 Commandments. This was the beginning of everything. This was brought to the beginning of the world. This was a process. God had expelled himself from the world and later on went back. And when he went back, he brought it. Moses was the one to bring God into this world. Now, with regards to that, we know that this shows us a bit that when we do right things, then of course we could bring God into the world. We could draw godliness into our lives, draw godliness into the world. And when unfortunately some people are doing negative things, then just like you have someone who doesn't want to confront with you, but where they're not comfortable with someone, they just stay away. They just stay away from that individual, or from that company, or from that club, because they don't want to be put into a situation that. So God has the same attitude. You want me to be around you, you want me to do things for you, you want to be a part, do things right. If somebody does things wrong, God says, no way, what do you call it? No way, Jose, right? I'm off. Call me later. Don't call us, we'll call you, right? We'll call you when we're interested. So obviously, the Jewish people were in Egypt since the end of Jacob's life. Back then, the Jews were well connected. They were respected, were successful. Jacob's son was Joseph. He was the king of Egypt. He brought his brothers. He brought his father. Everything was going by the book. Everything was going right. And over time, the Egyptians started to take advantage on the Jews, right? To the extent that eventually they enslaved them. They made them slaves, and in the harshest way, like we just described earlier a few minutes ago. And eventually God decided it was enough. Enough is enough, and he's coming down, and he wants to save us. And he brought the 10 plagues on the Egyptians and freed the Jews from Egypt. But it was much more than just a technical sequence of events that took place, working the way it is. It was a plan. Everything was pre-planned. This thing that seems like a kind of a wrong, what is it called? Malfunction in the history, where Jacob's kids were all doing everything right, and then next thing you know it, they're enslaved, and then the next thing you know it, they're being redeemed. This was part of God's plan. God actually brought the Jews into Egypt because we need to elevate Egypt. We need to bring sparks of holiness that were in Egypt. And the Jews were actually, Abraham was given the choice. And he said exile. Why did he say exile? Why didn't he just say, why do I have to choose? Ask someone else. He could have said that. Or why do they have to go through hardships? God told him, you remember we spoke about it last week, Moses' 2 children. We says, Moses' 2 children, why don't we hear them? Where did they go? Moses had 2 children. He was the greatest leader we ever had. What about his children? Why don't we hear anything of them? Remember what we said? Moses' children did not grow up in Egypt. They went out of Egypt. They were outside of Egypt. They didn't go through the hardships that the Jews went through. So they were not able to lead. They didn't have what it takes.
They were already born in Egypt?
They were born in Midian. Moses fled to Midian. That's where he married Zipporah. Right? And when he came back with his family, Aaron said, no, don't bring your family. We need to get everybody out of here. And they grew up outside of Egypt. So they didn't go through the hard times. Guess what? You don't go through the hard times. You don't have what it takes to face difficulty. They didn't have what it takes to be leaders. That's why we don't hear them. So God's plan was to bring the Jews to Egypt, not as a punishment, not as anything we did wrong. It was our way, God's way, to refine the world, to make the world a more holy, a more spiritual, a more delicate place. That's what we need. That's our mission. Now, if our mission was successful, there will be no more exile. The exodus from Egypt would be final and total. For some reason, though, we messed up. We messed up. I'm sorry to tell you, but we messed up, and the mission was not fully accomplished. And therefore, the redemption was not total and complete. And although we physically left Egypt, but guess what? There's a little bit of Egypt within us. And it's easier to take the Jews out of Egypt. It's far more difficult to get Egypt out of the Jews. So this redemption that we're celebrating in the night of Passover is confronted by the child, by the son, or by the person who's just coming to the Seder and said, what is this whole celebration about? Just walk out of the room that's nice and air conditioned. There's crazy things. People are dying out of starvation. There's wars, there's famine, there's serious stuff all over the world. The world is a chaos. Does this look like a redemption to you? Is there what to celebrate here? And we say, hold it. Yes, there was a redemption, but it wasn't complete. It's not full and it's not complete. And that's why we're gathered here today, we tell him. And let's look at the next quote. This is what the Tanya says. I'm sorry it came out a little small. I meant it to be a little big. But this is what the Tanya, we spoke about it on Friday night, if you remember. Why did the Jews have to run away, to flee from Egypt? This form of divine service, the Tanya says the Alter Rebbe, yes, the Alter Rebbe, in which the divine soul breaks free from his exile within the body, while the body and animal soul remain in their lowly state, is analogous to Exodus from Egypt, of which it is written that the people escaped. The Jews told Pharaoh they would leave Egypt for only 3 days, but upon being released from his land, they escaped. Remember the story? They said 3 days, adios, we don't want to see you anymore. After 3 days, that's why the messengers came back, and it took Pharaoh only on the 7th day to start chasing them. At first glance, it seems strange. Why should it have been so in a manner of flight? Had they demanded of Pharaoh that he set them free forever, would he not have been forced to do so, having been stricken by the plagues? Of course Pharaoh would have sent them out. They drove him out. But the Jews had to run away. Remember we said about it Friday. What is there to run away from? It wasn't about Pharaoh. It wasn't about the Egyptians. They were completely surrendered. After 10 plagues, they had no say whatsoever. But the Jews had to run away. It was a state of mind that we were at. We had to run away, escape. The explanation lies in the spiritual aspect of Exodus. And this was reflected in its physical counterpart, just as every event in Jewish history reflects a parallel spiritual process. The, what's this word? Corporal enslavement of the Jewish people in Egypt reflected the enslavement of their soul by a klipa, the Egyptian impurity. Klipa is a name in Kabbalah to the unholy forces. The exodus from Egypt likewise represented the spiritual liberation of this klipa, since the spiritual exodus was an act of escape, which means their soul broke away and escaped from impurity of Egypt, while the body and animal soul were still in exile within the klipa. Therefore, the physical exodus likewise assumed the manner of an escape. They had to run away. There was no other choice. Pharaoh was sending them out with all dignity and with all honor. He said, just leave. But we didn't leave. We had to run away. We had to escape. We had to flee. Why we had to flee? Because it was still in the midst of a struggle. And that's what the Tanya says. But escape was necessary because the evil in the animal soul of Israel was still strong in the left part of their heart. The seed of the animal soul for their impurity, the impurity of Klipa, did not cease until the giving of the Torah. Their aim and desire was their divine soul leave the exile of Sitra Acha, the impurity of Egypt, and then it cleaved to God. So Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains, we had to run away. We had to get out of Egypt. We did our work in Egypt. Granted, we didn't do a perfect work. Otherwise, we would be redeemed forever. But still, we had to run away because there was still evil. There was still a little bit of Egypt that was left within us. That's why we needed the 49 days to refine ourselves and to reconnect to who we are, to our identity, to God, to our Jewishness, and so on and so forth.
Is that called again, the 49 days? Is that called again?
Sfirat Omer.
No, the Omer, right?
Omer, yes.
And what does it say you have to every day do a prayer and say count the Omer?
Yeah, we count the Omer.
Where
Starting.
does it say that?
Oh, not in this quote, but it does. Yeah, it does say, yeah. Anyway, and here's something interesting about the Egyptian influence on the Jews. Remember, the Egyptians were cruel to us, they were bad to us, but guess what? After 210 years, they actually taught us a few things, and they made us act like them in certain ways. It says the Egyptians treated us cruelly, and they made us suffer, and they imposed hard labor on us. This is a quote from the Haggadah. But the Hebrew, it's not only treated us cruelly, which means vayareu lanu, it means vayareu otanu. Vayareu otanu, it means they made us evil. In those 210 years we were in Egypt, they made us, they influenced our souls, they influenced us in a way that not only they caused evil to us, they made us evil. And that was something that was very difficult to cope with when leaving Egypt. Because it's not only they treated us badly, but we always stayed, the way we were. We were influenced. It's inevitable. A human is a social creature. You put someone in a good company, in a good society, and they're becoming a better person. You put someone in a bad society, a bad environment. You see that with little kids. I see you're missing some cupcakes. Okay, we'll get some more.
I mean, let me ask you a question. Joseph was the king, right?
Crazy heroin.
I guess because everybody's doing so well in Egypt, a lot of Jews actually came to Egypt.
Uh-huh.
And so later on, it was like, guess what, guys? They
Yeah.
were slaves
Yeah.
in Goshen. So they're like kidnapped almost. Or
Correct.
imprisoned for being slaves.
Correct, yeah.
Jewish. All right. And also, but a lot of people must have been educated. Because you think about it, a lot of Jews came over, they must have had some education.
Correct.
Who then they gave to their kids as well.
It was the fourth generation. Remember, fourth generation growing up in slavery, when your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were holding bricks the whole day long, you don't know anything better.
Yeah.
That influence, that has a great influence on someone.
Yeah, it does, actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also, were these were Jewish slaves right here, right?
Yes.
So can we gather anything from this at all?
Can we what?
Gather, can we gather any kind of information from these photos?
From
Were they short? Were they strong? Were they big noses? They have big ears? I mean, that one guy who's kneeling down looks like he's Jewish. He looks like
does he look Jewish? You have to see whether he's circumcised.
he's kind of dark too. Dark skin. Yeah,
Dark-skinned Jewish.
They weren't that kind of cute, were they?
I think they look better than the drawings here. I would guess. This also explains the fact we celebrate Passover in the exile here and now, with the hardship, with the poverty surrounding us, as we explained. And it's also possible for enemies to go every generation and try to kill us. The child says, hold it. You're praising God. You're giving God all the credit. But the next thing you know, we got Palestinians on our borders and Iranians and Hezbollah and Syrians. What's going on? So we explain to the child, listen, redemption started. It didn't finish. We're not there yet. We're celebrating what we could celebrate, but we're surely with an appetite for more. And we're surely waiting. And we're not only just sitting back and waiting, we're going to do something about it for the ultimate redemption to come. And we ask, why do we celebrate that on Passover? We could say that on Purim or all the other Jewish holidays where they wanted to kill us and we were saved. So
Is this a real hieroglyphic? This is a real picture of Savior?
I got it from the internet. I hope, I Googled something, and I'm sorry, I didn't go to Egypt. Oh, really? If there's one thing in the world you can't trust, it's Google.
As you teach this lesson, you look at this, there's a lot going on here.
Uh-huh.
In that picture.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm sorry, I just chose the most random picture I thought of. Enslavement, Jewish slavery.
Imagine it's pretty warm outside in spring and kind of left Egypt.
Uh-huh. Right. Oh, that was nice. Last week, right? They said, okay, so why do we celebrate on Passover? What's the story? Why Passover of all holidays? And, in spite of their low spiritual status, we just said, they influenced us, the Egyptians, and God was still kind to us, and He took us out of Egypt. So much so that during the time of the splitting of the Red Sea, when the Jews were passing and the Egyptians were drowning, the angel said, what's going on here? These are idol worshippers and those are idol worshippers. Why are you saving these over those? Indeed, it was God's choice to choose our nation over other nations. There was nothing special about us, so to speak. Obviously, if you look deeper, you would see there's much more to it. But on our practical day-to-day conduct, we were just like the Egyptians. We were just doing, what is it called? Forget it. Whatever. I wanted to give an expression.
Can you give me 5 examples?
Yeah, whatever. Doing the thing and saying the thing, whatever. What is it called? Doing.
Conforming.
Conforming. Okay. So this is what we said about the Dayenu. Let's look at what the Rebbe explained. The true and ultimate definition of free choice, where choosing one or two options means rejection of the other. That's free choice. By the way, keep that in mind. Choosing one, you can't have both. You can't have a cake and have a diet at the same time, Arthur. Okay? 2 cakes you could have at the same time. I mean, you could get a stomach ache, but don't try it at home. Whoever listening, don't try it at home. Okay? So choosing one and rejecting the other implies that no external factors can influence the choice of the chooser. It must come from the deepest level, the place within us where no outside factors, be they emotional, intellectual, or anything else, really matter. Very essence. For if there is to be any outside factor that draws the interest of the chooser in a particular direction, the chooser is then not really free to choose as they desire, for there is something pulling them in a specific direction. That's the definition of free choice as brought by the Rebbe. And you could bring several examples. Let's take a simple example. You have someone who's a bright, genius mind, and and he's all day in study and research, and you come to him and you say, would you like to have a chocolate bar, or would you like to read the new research that was just published by Stanford University about the topic you're just dealing with? So chances are they would reject the chocolate bar, and they would run on you, jump on you to get that new research they want to read. So obviously, the field of research they're involved with is much more attractive to that individual. And it's the natural instinct that would dictate the choice. And it happens all the time. Sometimes we say free choice, but at the end of the day, it's an instinct. It's something that there was always going to be something to make that choice. There's never, guess what? A human being cannot have a free choice. A lot of the public, what is it called? The commercials, the ads, the big companies, they use all these messages, right? They implement all these subconscious, subconscious. You see, you watch a movie, and the main actor wears a Rolex watch, and he's like the big guy who's doing all the things, and you have it in your next time you pass by a Rolex, and your mind, how it is, it influences your mind, and they make all these different things to try and really to try and mess with your choice, because they want you to choose their product over other product. So really, true free choice could only exist with God. And this is what we celebrate on Passover. This is what the Rebbe says. The application of this idea to its fullest degree is reserved for God himself. It is inconceivable for anything outside of God to have value or importance that would enable it to attract or interest him in making his decisions. This is the meaning of the verse in Malachi. I loved you, said the Lord, and you said, how have you loved us? Was not Esau a brother to Jacob, says the Lord? And I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau. I brought that quote when we studied Chassidut 2 weeks ago. Hasidic thought explains this verse as follows. In his very essence, the virtue and righteousness of Jacob does not appeal to him. Right? There's a level of godliness where Jacob and Esau, where Hitler and Maimonides are exactly the same. The level of godliness where a person's actions, a person's thoughts is completely irrelevant. This is God as being in the loftiest and most elevated form. So there's no implication between the words and the things and the actions of the inferior beings to God. So that level, Jacob and Esau, a righteous people and a righteous person and a murderer, a rapist, are identical. Esau is a brother to Jacob. Brother as in identical, as in standing on the same level. So this is a level in the very essence. The virtue and righteousness of Jacob does not appeal to him. The misdeeds of evil of Esau does not anger him. They are brothers of equal status. And then, only then, God chooses. In his deepest essence, he makes Jacob his own people. This is the deeper dimension of the exodus of Egypt. On the surface, it appeared as if the Jews were undeserving to be freed. They looked similar to the Egyptians. However, this was an expression of the deep-rooted bond that exists between God and the Jewish people, just as this connection is not built upon any qualifications or expectations. It is simply a connection of the essence. So too, it cannot be broken by means of sin and transgression. And to me, this is the most important line in this whole class, that it doesn't really matter what a person is and their upbringing and their background and their affiliation, and they know about it, they learn about it, they don't know about it. The mere fact that we are Jewish, we are connected to God, and God wants us, and God loves us, and God chooses us, and God wants to benefit us. Whether we do things towards it or we don't do things towards it, there's a level of godliness that our actions have no implication whatsoever. Now, don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean we could go wild partying every day. It doesn't mean we're not committed to do what we need to do. But it does mean that even when a person is in a spiritual level, they're not affiliated, they don't know what they're doing, they don't believe even, they don't think that God even exists. They're actually at the same level like the most righteous and the most pious person, because they are Jewish and God had chosen them and chosen us in the very same manner. So, yes?
Well, it talks a lot about how we're like the Egyptians a little bit. But in essence, we weren't at all. We were accumulating, we weren't assimilating.
Right. But at the end of the day, what matters in this world is the practical sense of things. If we were acting like Egyptians, speaking like Egyptians, I remember now the expression, you walk the walk and talk the talk, right? That's what I wanted to say earlier, right? So we were doing everything like the Egyptians, so much so that the angels who could see spiritual things, they could see through things.
Right.
Obviously, they have eyes that are far beyond ours. But the angel will say, those are just exactly the same like these ones. So it says that if God would not have saved us from Egypt, we were so sunk, 49 gates of impurity. Mind you, 210 years, 49 gates. If we would pass the 50th gate, there will be no way out of Egypt. The Jews were in Egypt, we were sunk in 49 gates of impurity. That's why we count. We said the counting of the Omer, 49 days.
Like with the blood on the door also, because they want to make sure the angels didn't make a mistake?
There were no angels. That's why God came himself. Angels don't make mistakes, obviously. They're not pre-planned to make mistakes. But God came himself. Although the blood on the door and everything was very obvious, God wanted to make sure that everyone is out, that everyone is safe, everyone is right. Although it didn't help much because 80% of the people did stay behind when we left Egypt. But that was a different story. It was our choice, not his. Anyway, the conclusion of that is that, with this, the effect of what had happened in the past is not supposed to stay in the past. It's supposed to be in the present and even more so in the future. Because what we celebrate in Egypt is we understand we're not perfect. We don't tell everyone how good everything is and how wonderful it is. We don't ignore the problems. We don't say, our nation is the best and the greatest and we do everything right. No. We know many issues that we have within ourselves and, of course, between us and other nations. Nevertheless, we understand that the celebration in Passover is about redemption. It's about a process that started. It started 3,300 years ago, and it's an ongoing process because every Jew is a link to that chain. And every good deed, every positive thing we do, right? Josh was telling me about doing a positive deed with his time. I must say that I was very impressed. I didn't tell you that, but later I digested it again. And it's beautiful. You actually took an idea and put it into practical means. So that's very nice. Every positive thing we do has a tremendous effect. We don't necessarily see it, but it has an effect. And just doing that and being able to be a part of this process is a great mitzvah. It's a great thing. It's a great privilege God had given to his nation, to us. So anyway, I'm still not sure about next week's class, or maybe in 2 weeks we'll see how it goes. But that's that. I'm sorry, it was supposed to be shorter than usual, but it wasn't. So.
Was it my mom who came from Egypt?